Odysseus left Troy with 12 ships and hundreds of men. 10 years later, he reached Ithaca alone. The monsters caused only half the disaster. Pride, temptation, hunger, and mistrust did the rest. How did Greece's cleverest hero keep escaping danger? Only to create more? Before the voyage home, Odysseus had already spent 10 years fighting at Troy. He was king of the rocky island of Ithaca, where Penelope and their baby son Telemachus had waited since his departure. By the time the war ended, the child he remembered was already growing up without him. When brute force failed, Odysseus helped end the war with a trick: a massive wooden horse. Greek soldiers hid inside it, Troy lowered its guard, and the city fell. His fame rested on one remarkable skill: turning impossible situations into clever solutions. He had solved ancient Greece's hardest military problem. Going home should have been the easy part. The war was over, and only one goal remained: reaching Ithaca. The first disaster would come from staying too long after a victory. The fleet landed near the Cicones, allies of defeated Troy. Odysseus and his men raided the coast and seized supplies and treasure. Odysseus wanted to load the ships and leave immediately. His men wanted one more night of food, wine, and celebration. They still remembered home. They simply preferred one more night of victory. The delay gave the Cicones time to return with reinforcements. Odysseus lost men before the real journey had properly begun. A storm then drove the fleet far from its intended course. They landed among the Lotus eaters, whose strange flowering food made home feel unimportant. A few sailors ate the lotus and stopped wanting to return. The plant did not kill them. It weakened the goal that had kept them moving. Odysseus dragged the affected men back to the ships by force. At the Cicones, the crew remembered home but delayed leaving. Among the Lotus eaters, some nearly stopped wanting home at all. Their next stop offered sheep, cheese, and a cave with no owner in sight. Most of the men wanted to take supplies and return to the ships. Odysseus chose to wait for whoever lived there. In the world of the poem, hosts and guests owed each other protection, respect, and fair exchange. That unwritten rule was called Xenia. A one-eyed giant named Polyphemus returned and sealed the entrance with a boulder. He violated every expectation of Xenia and killed members of the crew. Curiosity, confidence, and the hope of receiving hospitality may all have shaped Odysseus's choice to stay. Killing Polyphemus would not solve the problem. Only the giant was strong enough to move the boulder, blocking the exit. Odysseus needed to disable him without leaving everyone trapped. He gave Polyphemus strong wine until the giant collapsed into sleep. Before that, Odysseus had told him that his name was Nobody. The men then blinded Polyphemus with a sharpened stake. Polyphemus screamed and called to the other Cyclops for help. When they asked who was attacking him, he answered that nobody was hurting him. Believing no attacker was present, the other Cyclops left him without help. At dawn, Polyphemus felt the backs of his sheep as he released them from the cave. He never thought to check beneath their bodies. The survivors escaped by clinging underneath the animals. The plan used physical limits, language, and the giant's own expectations against him. It was exactly the kind of problem Odysseus knew how to solve. Then, from the safety of the departing ship, he shouted his real name across the water. In that moment, owning the victory seemed more important than leaving it anonymous. The escape plan was perfect. The victory speech was not. Polyphemus now knew whom to blame and prayed to his father for revenge. His father was Poseidon, god of the sea. Cleverness had taken Odysseus out of the cave. Self-control might have prevented him from creating an enemy who ruled the ocean ahead. The Greek gods did not act with one shared purpose. Poseidon opposed Odysseus, while Athena repeatedly protected him. Poseidon became an outside force pressing against the voyage. But not every later disaster came directly from the sea god. Divine anger created pressure, while human choices shaped the response. Aeolus gave Odysseus a leather bag containing the dangerous winds. Odysseus guarded it closely, while his crew never fully understood what it contained. Favorable winds carried the ships close enough for Ithaca's coastline to appear ahead. Home was no longer an idea on the horizon. It was physically visible. After days of steering, Odysseus finally fell asleep. His men suspected the guarded bag held treasure their king refused to share. They opened it, and the trapped winds burst across the sea. The fleet was blown away from Ithaca and back into danger. The episode reveals more than greed. The crew assumed secrecy, where Odysseus may have assumed obedience. Leader and crew no longer shared the same understanding of the plan. Once that shared understanding disappeared, even a gift designed to save them became another source of disaster. Soon afterward, the fleet entered a narrow harbor controlled by the giant Laestrygonians. Boulders crushed ship after ship inside the trap. Only Odysseus's vessel escaped because it had remained near the harbor entrance. 12 ships had become one. That final ship reached the island of Circe. Some of the men entered her house, and she transformed them into pigs. One sailor escaped and warned Odysseus. Hermes gave Odysseus protection against Circe's magic. Odysseus confronted her, and Circe restored the men to human form. Yet the crew did not leave after the rescue. Circe's island offered full tables, warm shelter, and relief from a sea that had already destroyed almost everything. They remained there for nearly a year. Eventually, Odysseus's own men had to remind their leader that home still existed. The Lotus had weakened the desire to return. Circe offered food, rest, safety, and no ocean to face. Nothing forced them to abandon their goal. The danger was that comfort slowly made the goal feel less urgent. Some obstacles stopped people by attacking them. Others stopped them by making departure feel unnecessary. The rescue required courage. Remembering to leave took nearly a year. To find the route home, Odysseus next had to approach the world of the dead. At the edge of the underworld, Odysseus performed a dark ritual. The prophet Tiresias appeared and delivered a clear warning. The crew must not touch the sacred cattle of Helios. Then, the ghost of Odysseus's mother emerged from the dead. She had been alive when he sailed to war. Now he learned that she had died, while he was still away. He reached for her 3 times. 3 times, his arms closed on empty air. Until then, time had been measured in years, islands, ships, and lost men. Now it was measured by someone he would never see alive again. For the first time, the cost of delay was not another damaged ship or another wrong turn. It was a relationship that could never be recovered. Home had not remained unchanged while Odysseus traveled. Telemachus had grown from a baby into a young man. Penelope had endured years of pressure without him. Delay does not only move a destination farther away, it can transform the place a person hopes to return to. The Sirens lured sailors toward hidden rocks with an irresistible song. Odysseus wanted to hear it and survive. His crew packed their ears with wax. They tied Odysseus tightly to the mast under his own instructions. He ordered them not to release him, whatever he later demanded. When the song reached him, he begged to be untied. The crew obeyed the version of Odysseus who had spoken before the temptation began. They tightened the ropes and kept rowing. The ship passed safely beyond the rocks, while his desperate orders faded with the song. At the Cyclops, Odysseus trusted himself after the danger had passed and revealed his name. At the Sirens, he assumed that temptation would overpower his judgment. Instead of relying on willpower, he created a limit in advance. The lesson is practical without making the episode a modern theory. When a weakness is predictable, a promise to be stronger may not be enough. Next came a strait with danger on both sides. Scylla could seize several sailors from the deck. Charybdis could swallow the entire ship. There was no safe route. Odysseus chose the path that preserved most of the crew, though several men died. He could not save everyone, and he could not honestly promise that he would. This was not a victory. It was the smaller tragedy in a situation with no clean answer. The survivors reached the island of Helios's sacred cattle. Odysseus repeated Tiresias's warning before they landed. Bad weather trapped the crew until their supplies disappeared. Hunger sharpened into desperation. While Odysseus slept, the starving men killed and ate the cattle. Helios demanded punishment, and Zeus destroyed the ship with a lightning bolt. Every remaining sailor drowned. Only Odysseus survived, clinging to broken wood. The men had understood the warning, but they were starving and no longer certain that home was reachable. The warning described a future punishment. Hunger was happening in the present. They chose relief from immediate suffering over a future they had stopped trusting. That does not make their choice right. It makes the failure understandable. A long-term goal becomes difficult to protect when a group loses faith in the future supporting it. Orders alone could not restore the hope and trust that the voyage had consumed. The journey of a fleet had ended. Only one exhausted man remained. Odysseus washed ashore on the island of the nymph Calypso. She kept him there for 7 years. Most of his 10-year journey was not spent fighting monsters. 7 years passed on one quiet island. Calypso offered safety, rest, endless youth, and freedom from death. On paper, it sounded better than another storm, another monster, or another funeral. Odysseus still wanted Ithaca. This was not a romance. It was captivity, disguised by comfort. Athena eventually argued for his release, and Calypso was ordered to let him go. Immortality could not replace Penelope, Telemachus, responsibility, or personal history. It could preserve his body, while separating him forever from the life that made him Odysseus. Home was not simply the safest place available. It was the place where Odysseus's life had meaning and continuity. He built a raft and returned to the sea. A storm nearly killed him before he reached the land of the Phaeacians. Their ruler heard his story and provided a ship for Ithaca. Odysseus finally reached his island, exhausted and unrecognizable. But reaching Ithaca was not the same as returning to his life. During his absence, the palace had fallen under a slow occupation. Suitors consumed Odysseus's food, wine, and wealth. They pressured Penelope to remarry and threatened Telemachus. Most people believed Odysseus was dead. These men were not merely romantic rivals. They were guests destroying the household that sustained them. Polyphemus had violated the host's side of Xenia. The suitors violated the guest's side. Penelope had resisted them with a strategy of her own. She promised to choose a husband after completing a burial shroud. By day, she wove it. By night, she secretly undid the work. The trick bought years of time. One way to read the contrast is that Odysseus used intelligence publicly, while Penelope used hers quietly and defensively. Athena disguised Odysseus as an old beggar. He first stayed with Eumaeus, a loyal servant. Telemachus had traveled in search of news about his father and was now returning. At Eumaeus's hut, Athena briefly removed the disguise. Telemachus saw the true face of the father he had known mostly through absence and stories. Father and son embraced. Then they began planning how two men could confront an entire hall of suitors. Odysseus then resumed the disguise and entered the palace. He endured insults without revealing himself. At the Cyclops, he had announced his identity too early. At the Sirens, he had created a limit before temptation. In Ithaca, he kept his identity hidden until the right moment. Intelligence was finally working beside patience and self-control. Near the palace gate, an old dog named Argos lifted his head. The animal was neglected, weak, and almost forgotten, but he recognized Odysseus immediately beneath the disguise. Odysseus could not openly greet him without risking the plan. After waiting 20 years, Argos closed his eyes and died. The past had recognized Odysseus before the palace did. Penelope announced a contest for the men seeking her hand. The winner had to string Odysseus's bow and shoot through a row of axe heads. One suitor after another failed even to bend the weapon. The disguised beggar asked for a turn. Odysseus strung the bow with ease. His arrow passed cleanly through the line of axe heads. The suitors had occupied his house, consumed his wealth, and claimed his status. Yet none could wield the object most closely associated with his authority. The bow revealed the warrior and king. It also showed that possession was not the same as belonging. The suitors could occupy his place without becoming the person whose place it was. Odysseus then revealed his identity. Telemachus and a few loyal servants stood beside him. Together, they defeated the suitors and ended the occupation of the palace. These men had consumed the household's wealth, pressured Penelope, and threatened Telemachus. The poem presents the slaughter as a restoration of order. Its scale can still feel disturbing to a modern audience. Even then, Penelope did not immediately accept Odysseus as her husband. 20 years had passed. Appearances could change, and divine disguises belonged to this world. Caution had protected Penelope for years. She would not abandon it because a stranger made a claim. Instead, Penelope gave an instruction designed to test knowledge rather than strength. She mentioned that their marriage bed could be moved. Odysseus reacted at once. He had built that bed around a living olive tree rooted in the earth. Part of the tree still formed the bed itself. Moving it intact was impossible without cutting it away from the tree and destroying the work. Only Odysseus and Penelope knew that private secret. His reaction gave Penelope something no public performance could provide. It revealed a memory that belonged only to their marriage. The bow had proven that he was the king of the household. The bed proved that he was the husband Penelope remembered. The contest had tested skill in front of an audience. The bed tested identity in the privacy of shared memory. Authority could restore the house. Shared memory restored the marriage. Odysseus had spent 10 years crossing unstable water. His identity was finally confirmed by something that could not drift. The sea had carried him through changing names, disguises, losses, and temptations. The bed remained rooted in a living tree. Storms, monsters, and Poseidon pushed against Odysseus from outside. Pride, temptation, hunger, fear, and mistrust damaged the journey from within. Cleverness repeatedly helped him escape danger. But cleverness alone could not create patience, trust, responsibility, or self-control. At the Cyclops, he revealed his name too soon. At the Sirens, he built a limit before temptation arrived. At Ithaca, he waited until the correct moment. His journey did not end when he touched the island or reclaimed the palace. It ended when a private memory joined him again to Penelope, his history, and his home. After years on a shifting sea, Odysseus was recognized beside a bed, rooted to a living olive tree.